It seems like you learn something new almost every day in relation to the gaming world. And this right here is something that I found rather interesting because it's something that hardly ever gets talked about. In fact, I've never heard anyone really talk about this, but apparently, um, Sega had scrapped a game console back in like around the mid 90s. I was supposed to come out either right before or right after Sega Saturn was released in 94. I'm talking about Sega Neptune. And apparently, that console was supposed to be like a hybrid console that was supposed to be like a cross between the Mega Drive and the 32X. And for whatever reason, um, it never made it to American or Japanese markets. In fact, it never made it to gaming markets. Period. And apparently, a um, a company or a entity called Games Care is supposed to be re-releasing the Sega Neptune. It's supposed to be a fan-made project, and apparently it's going to be available in Brazilian markets. I'm not exactly sure whether or not it's going to be available in American or Japanese markets. I don't know what the price is going to be, but I do find it very interesting, and I feel like it's something that would appeal to a niche audience of gamers because the current audience of gamers, the current generation gamers, they care more about graphics and first person shooters and realism and all that stuff. But Sega Neptune, for the most part, it's something that's very interesting because it makes me wonder, what kind of games. Would have been featured on that if it had came out, what the quality would have looked like in comparison to the PS1, would it have outsold the Sega Saturn, would it have sold more than the SNES, stuff like that. And like apparently like the Sega Neptune is a game system that apparently got canceled like in like late 95 for whatever reason. And I'm not exactly sure why because Sega never really talked about this in depth or anything like that. And I'm a bit shocked that Sega didn't try to bring this console back, especially considering the fact that we live in a day and age where nostalgia sells and people would love to see older stuff brought back to life. But yeah, Sega gave us the Sega Mini console a few years ago. It would have been cool if they gave us, the Sega Neptune, but then it seems like Sega's never going to get involved in the console wars ever again. And I think 98 was like the last time they ever released a game system. Sega hasn't been a part of the console war since 2001. And when Microsoft seemingly opting out of the console wars, a lot of people wonder whether or not it's time for Sega to try and get back in the console wars once again since there's less competition. Now, Sega's obviously, if they get involved in the console wars again, they're obviously not going to be able to compete with Nintendo or Sony, but it'd be cool to have a third option like we've had for the past like 20 years or whatever. But yeah, I mean, Sega Neptune seems like a console that it has a unique look to it. It looks like something that would be very fun to play. I'm not exactly sure whether or not it's backwards compatible, but Games Care, the entity that's supposed to be reviving it, it's supposed to be released in Brazilian markets, and we have no idea what the price is going to be. I don't think it should be too cheap, but it shouldn't be too expensive either. And for those who do get a hold of it, I'm pretty sure they're going to resell it for like double what they bought it for. And that's something that's just common in the gaming world when it comes to gaming or consoles or anything like that. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be like a rare collector's item in the future for those who like to collect classic games and classic game consoles and stuff like that. I don't think you'll be able to find it in any like used game stores or anything like that once it comes out because it's very rare. And apparently, when the Sega Neptune was being made, there were prototypes that were available back in the 90s or prototypes that existed back in the 90s, but they never really made it to markets. And I don't think anyone really has a copy of it at all. But yeah, I do feel like Sega's Forgotten Neptune console is something that I'm pretty sure a lot of people are very fascinated by, especially since this is something that doesn't get talked about as much as it should, and it's probably going to stand on as one of the biggest what ifs in gaming history because a lot of people think, what if Sega Neptune came out like during the mid '90s? Would have outsold Sega Saturn? Would have outsold Sega Dreamcast? Would it have helped Sega compete with Sony's PS1? That's something that I highly doubt, but I still would have loved to see what the Sega Neptune would have looked like and how a hybrid console would have worked back in the 90s, especially concerning the fact that, hybrid consoles weren't really a thing back in the day. But but yeah, this console is something that's really interesting, and I think it was supposed to be a 32-bit console, um, but this fan made project is something that I think Sega is cool with, because at this point, Sega's looking to get any type of publicity they can possibly get, whether it be through the Sonic the Hedgehog series, whether it be through rebooting older IPs, or whether it be through piracy or whatever. Because God forbids you pirate any of Nintendo's older games, because Nintendo will basically will send you like a cease and desist or threaten you with a suit or something like that if you try to do anything like that with their older game systems or their older games or whatever. But Sega, I don't think is like strict as Nintendo, and I'm pretty sure they won't really have a problem with this whatsoever. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what the games or old school games are going to look like on the Sega Neptune console once it comes out. But but yeah, I mean, I think Sega should really like consider getting back into the console wars, because I feel like the time is right for them to do so, especially considering the fact that Microsoft is moving more towards cloud-based gaming opposed to just making consoles. Because there's been a lot of rumors for the past couple of years that the Xbox Series X might be their final console, and I believe the Microsoft CEO had confirmed that during like a conference call or something like that, because he wanted to get more into cloud-based gaming. But yeah, there are people who like old school gaming and games and stuff like that better than the modern stuff, because it feels too realistic, and I don't know, it feels like real life simulation, and to them that's really boring. Sega Neptune was supposed to come out during a time period where video games felt like video games, and there are people who still have that mentality and feel like that's how games should be. So, as far as Sega Neptune's concerned, we have no idea when it's supposed to be released or anything like that. But I'm really interested to see what the games would look like on that. Whether or not it's backwards compatible, what's its price going to be, and whether or not it's going to come to American and Japanese markets sometime in the future.